Now, another day, another sleigh. We've got an awful lot to get to this evening, including the Bureau of Meteorology and the problems they've had with their website. There is actually some deeper problems at this beloved institution. We all rely upon it. Time to talk about it. Perhaps it is third rail, a holy figure we can't go after, but we'll do our best to try and hold them to account, as we learn to do. Speaking of wonderful debates, looking forward to Lucy Zelich and Stephen Conroy being here, and the one and only Megyn Kelly. The only place you will ever find her on Australian television is here on this show every Wednesday night, and she's ready to give it to the Dems who say they've never called Trump Hitler.
Maybe that's their defense. I didn't say the words, Trump is Hitler. He's the modern day Hitler. There's 10,000 sound bites of them saying, you know who else did what Trump is doing? Adolf Hitler.
But first, there is very good news for people who support Pauline Hanson, be they ones like myself that have been around for a long time or those that might be new to the bandwagon. Because the latest poll that has been released today shows the surge is real, the surge is on, and they have more than doubled their vote since the last federal election. Now, the Liberal Party number at 26, well, that is a world of pain. Yes, a lot of this comes from there, but still, have a look. One Nation at 15%, outpolling the Greens by 6 points. There are 6% of people undecided, the rest are Teals, etc., etc. But have a look at that. The Greens, who of course have added to having quite a sizable number in the Senate, in and around a 10% vote. Imagine what 15 can do at the upcoming election in a couple of years' time. Most interestingly is where this support is coming from. Let's compare the Greens to One Nation and break it down by age. 18 to 34-year-olds, 7% back in One Nation, 18% back in the Greens. In my generation of Gen X or the older millennials, 35 to 54, One Nation has surged to 16%. That is huge. Because the perception of One Nation is that its votes is 55 plus. Not true. The great bulk of the great middle of Australia is turning on to the message of One Nation. This is excellent because we know how hardcore they can be. We also know how reasonable many of the things they talk about are. I think it's a fabulous result. 16 to 8, double the vote. And 55 plus, 19% backing in One Nation compared to 4% of people who back in the Greens. And why they haven't grown up by 55, I don't know. But you know the story that we've been on for a while here. We saw it before the last election. We now sit where we do now, where One Nation have doubled their support since the last federal election. This is not a blip. This is a revolution. This is people changing their minds. Now, principally, when it comes to One Nation and One Nation support, that does affect the Senate. Now, in the same way that the left of Australian politics has decided to vote Green in the upper house, and then Labor in the lower house, well, presumably now people can vote One Nation, or more people, including people in and around my age, which is great to see, are suggesting that's the way they want to vote upstairs, producing more senators, holding the left-wing Senate to account, and then, of course, the preferences flow towards anyone but the the Labor Party, I should say, not a Freudian slip, when it comes to support to form a government. We're a long way out from an election, 2.5 years, but still really important. Our mate Kos Samaras, who I know some of you love and not love with his insights, I think that his insights are pretty interesting and worth having a look at. He has written about the phenomena of the types of things that are driving One Nation, and unsurprisingly, issues like mass immigration are what are driving things. And to see that the people who have got younger kids, who are paying off their homes, who may well be owning their own businesses, those people between 35 and 54 being turned onto it, means the world to me. Our data reveals this pattern with striking clarity. When asked to rank factors responsible for housing unaffordability, just 34% of Australians include immigration in their top three, equal with interest rates as well as structural economic factors. But when you become a One Nation supporter, it is 72%. See it for what it is, that immigration is in the top three. 52% of One Nation supporters, which now are double that of the Greens, place it as the number one issue. Baby boomers, 3 times more likely than Gen Z to think that immigration as a primary housing factor, 24% versus 9%. Homeowners and people who've actually done the hard yards, paid their home off, 24%. Believe that issues when it comes to mass migration are the problem compared to renters who are just at 11%. Now, for as long as I've had access to a microphone on radio and television, I have given the benefit of the doubt to One Nation. I have given the benefit of their state and federal leadership a chance to be heard. Because as you know, the extreme bulk of the media, they never talk to them. We talk to them regularly because, firstly, I know so many of you are starting to, if not have long supported, but also I want them to be able to say what they've got to say, come up with their ideas, talk about their ideas, debate the issues without somebody trying to jump down their throat. Now, inevitably, between now and the next election, the establishment media will find some new way to scandalise this movement. But remember, they've got tens of thousands of members now. They've now got 4 senators in the federal parliament. They've got representation, or they have 1 seats at least, in New South Wales, Victoria, Western Australia and in South Australia. All of this is good for our democracy. Well done to Pauline. And now she's so confident in the future of the party that it is no longer going to be called Pauline Hanson's One Nation. Instead, it is now just simply going to be called One Nation. She, of course, remains its head, will for as long as she wishes, which is an excellent thing. She is always welcome on this program, as are her senators and members of parliament. Now, let's get to an issue that was determinative at the last federal election. It was one that got people to flip their vote. And it was issues in and around inflation. Now, at the start of this year, the Liberal Party was leading with people who were paying off a mortgage. They were leading 51-49 in the polls. That group is the big swing group that you can follow about who wins an election. The federal government made a decision that they marketed as a cost of living response, but reality was that their decision to offer financial support, a couple of $100 to everyone from the smallest house in the smallest country town to the biggest house in the biggest city, they, of course, made a decision. This was to further their narrative that Australia had turned the corner against the battle of inflation. They made multiple announcements worth about $5 billion, which was this power price payoff. Now, it didn't actually reduce the amount of money that was around in electricity. It reduced the bills because they were partly subsidising every bill in the lead up to an election. Surprise, surprise. A $5 billion move that, as we said at the time, was to compensate for their failure on $275, but as a way of feeding into their message that they were doing something about inflation. I called it artificial at the time. I stand by every time I have said that. In fact, after these payments had been swirling around for a while, yes, inflation did begin to get into the zone where the Reserve Bank wanted it, somewhere between 2 and 3%, which is why in February of this year, just a few weeks out from the federal election, there was the first interest rate cut in a very long time. 13 interest rate rises, but this one, in many ways, turned around and was the proof in the pudding that the worst was behind us. There was even suggestions before the last federal election that there was plenty more interest rates to come.
Markets are now expecting around 4 interest rate cuts in Australia this calendar year.
By the time of the election, according to the Redbridge polling, the Labor Party was leading with those who were paying off a mortgage because they had beaten inflation artificially, because the Reserve Bank had dropped interest rates, and they ended up leading that group 55-45. So yes, the Liberal Party had a world of problems. They didn't make much better for themselves, but that was the reality of what happened at the election. Great politics, bad for the economy. Why? Because guess what happened? Just last month, we hit a one-year high when it came to inflation. Why? Because in many ways, the power payoff had disappeared. Today, we learn that inflation has now jumped by more than a full percent. Yes, the margin is now still just outside of the 3%, but remember all of those conversations about how important a 3 in front of it was compared to a 2 in front of it. Because of this inflation rise today, people predicting what the Reserve Bank are going to do as soon as Melbourne Cup Day are now saying that interest rates are off the table. Interest rate cuts are off the table. That's the word from the Commonwealth Bank. And going even further, despite the fact of much of the pain of those 13 interest rate rises only being allayed by a couple of cuts, according to the National Australia Bank, not until mid-next year. Mid-next year is when you can expect another interest rate cut.
No rate cuts for the rest of this year. Likely no rate cuts in the first quarter of next year, but we do have one more rate cut in our profile, but not until May of 2026.
Now, am I saying that this single payment was the determinative factor between the government being slightly returned or returned in the fashion of which they were, or being pushed into a minority? No. But of course, millions of people are in the scenario of trying to pay off their home. They're being told that the dragon had been slayed when the dragon just simply had a muzzle on it for a few months to get them through an election. And now, as inflation starts to return to where it was in the middle of last year, when the opinion polls were terrible for the federal government, there is now nothing to see and no one willing to talk about that they were on top of inflation. Everything is going up. It has been going up the whole time. They just were able to find a way, not quite to cook the books, but certainly to warm them up. We said that on budget night. We said that on mini budget night. We said that before the election. We said it in the election, and I say it very clearly after the election. Do not pay attention to what they say, pay attention to what they do. And what they have done is got out of the way, and we are now being hit with the reality of inflation as bad as it was 12 months ago when no interest rate cuts were coming. For many of the past few days, there has been a lot of conversation about the Bureau of Meteorology, the BOM, and its website. The old one that people knew like the back of their hand, and the new one that decided to change the intensity colours around things like storms, meaning that when the good people of Queensland were being thumped about in southeast Queensland late last week, many people didn't realise how bad this was going to be because the colours they had got used to of really dark reds and into black, showing you where on the map the hailstones were going to fall, all of that disappeared. Now, we spoke in part about this behind the scenes, trying to work out what pre-information there was. And yes, there was a message on the BOM's website that they were going to change. But there really was no big effort to tell people what had changed and to tell people that certain parts of Queensland were literally just going to disappear off the map, and the colour coding that all of us know about the intensity of storms. The darker the colour, the worse it's going to be, meant that there were a lot of people left flat-footed, and the Premier of Queensland is angry on their behalf.
The changes to the federally run Bureau of Meteorology website are not good enough. The changes to the website don't make sense. The website is flawed. Easy access to individual radars have been removed, the colour scheme we've become accustomed to has changed, and platitudes from Canberra won't cut it with Queenslanders.
The Nationals leader, David Littleproud, also pointed out that one of the problems with this change means that farmers are not able to track storms. That matters because you're trying to take care of your crops. And if the dark of hail is replaced with a generic colour that is covering dozens and dozens of areas, you don't think you're going to get hit as hard.
The Bureau has been littered with errors and mistakes for some years now. In fact, their business model is to mess up and ask for more money. And that's effectively all they've done. Whether it was last year when they predicted that we're going to have a drought, a whole lot of farmers offloaded all their livestock and crashed the market. And then we had one of the best seasons we've ever had, down to just simply managing a website. The Bureau of Meteorology is losing the currency that it has in regional Australia and right across the country.
Now, good that they're making noise, but they were a little bit late to the party. This thing has been rolling for quite a few days, including both before, during and after the storm. This is where I think the opposition should have been facing much more political pressure, many more questions inside both the upper and lower house, but they chose not to do so. That's their business. Murray Watt is the minister, as the Environment Minister, who is responsible for what has happened here when it comes to this particular website. We know that this thing has cost $4.1 million, but finally the minister decided, hang on, can you all come and see me, please, because I want to work out what the hell's going on. Because after all, if there is one area that this government is desperate to try to improve its standing in, it is Queensland. Now, Queensland produced an awful lot of brand new MPs. It was, in many ways, the difference between just being returned and 90 plus seats. So they are very sensitive when Queensland arcs up like this. Well, after the meeting that took place today with the minister, the boss of the Bureau is now saying sorry. Here is what Dr. Stone is saying as the acting CEO of the people who spent $4 million on a website that just doesn't make sense anymore.
I'd like to offer my sincere apologies for the challenges the change has caused. It's clear that we need to do more to help people navigate the change, both by making adjustments to the website and by helping users understand its new features.
Yeah, no, just put it back the way it was in terms of storm information. New fonts, new places, an education campaign. Okay, but how can you turn around and change what was to what is? But it brings us to a bigger issue. There are quite a few problems with the Bureau of Meteorology, and right up there with the Electoral Commission. It is one of those things we have to have maximum faith in, not just because we fund it, but because many people make big decisions about what they're going to do with their property when storms are on their way. As storm season rolls into Queensland, and again, there'll be bushfire issues in every other state, we know plenty of people will be turning to this website for more information. But as I said, there are some other issues that I want to talk about where perhaps we need greater oversight of the Bureau. Maybe we need to pay more attention to the Senate estimates. Maybe there needs to be a special standing committee of MPs who oversee and constantly are asking critical questions of this organisation, because it is not just the new website that is a problem. Remember, in 2022, they spent $220,000 on a rebrand because they didn't like people calling it the bomb. In fact, BOM asked media outlets on Tuesday of this story back in 2022 to update their style guides, which means the things that you say on TV in a news bulletin, to stop calling it the Weather Bureau and the bomb, even though on its own mobile app it's still currently called Bomb Weather. Still to this day, that's what it's called. Instead, it asked to be called the Bureau of Meteorology. In the first instance, perhaps the Bureau in subsequent references. Again, further information here was that the BOM rebranding aimed to overcome negative associations related to the acronym. BOM as in B-O-M-B? Nobody thinks that. In Australia, the BOM means the Bureau of Meteorology. The Bureau of Meteorology told its staff that it wanted to avoid the BOM nickname back in 2022 due to, quote, negative associations related to the acronym. Newly released documents revealed this way back when. Just last year, nearly $1 billion was spent supposedly overhauling matters to do with information technology. However, staff had previously tried to deny people knowing how much of the taxpayers' money was spent upgrading the technology. The CEO of the Bureau of Meteorology, now former, Andrew Johnson, revealed to staff the cost of its delayed IT overhaul, one of Australia's most expensive ever, at $1 billion, despite repeatedly telling senators such details must be kept under wraps for cabinet secrecy. Remember, that's the stuff that I talked about last night when those reports that Chris Bowen had about just how much power prices were going to increase because of the renewables-only approach to government. The documents that were eventually released had line after line after line redacted as if the location of Jimmy Hoffa's body or who was responsible for the Kennedy assassination was in there. It wasn't about national security. It was about arse covering when it came to the government. Have a look at this document. Well, this again is a perfect example. This is about power prices and the policies of this government. The same attitude was taken by the people who ran the Bureau of Meteorology about a $4 billion upgrade to its information technology. What about in September last year when the BOM decided to release a tsunami alert? A tsunami alert for a tsunami that was not in existence and was not coming, and they had to say sorry for again.
The test warnings were issued to the public via the BOM Weather app in error as part of the testing process. The test warnings were cancelled immediately after they were issued. The Bureau acknowledges and apologises for any confusion that this test has caused.
Now, you'll notice the very careful media management around this is that it's not done in an interview, it's not done in a press conference, it's done in a pre-recorded statement, just like the apology for the website was. Now, this is a way of apologising but not having to explain. Perhaps an idea about the levels of secrecy that exist inside a government. Now, again, I love the bomb like everyone else. I trust the bomb like everyone else, but people have gotten bitten by that trust. Because, yes, while weather prediction is not an exact science, when you're trying to show things like a real-time radar, yeah, people start to make their choices about what they're going to do. And in the case of ex-tropical cyclone Alfred, there was a big miscalculation which took place when it came to exactly where this thing was going to hit, exactly how hard it was going to hit. Now, I was in it, I reported on it, and it was not a nothing. But the once in a 35-year cyclone stuff, well, we all know that wasn't the case. And instead, there were actual coastal communities to the north of Brisbane who got absolutely flooded because they had expected that what was about to happen during the night was going to happen much to the south or even inland of what they are. The damage in millions of dollars. In fact, then the Bureau of Meteorology defended its forecasts after coastal communities said that they were not properly warned. It's not a claim, it's the reality. They were not properly warned. One of their biggest mistakes, one that became very significant, was the Lismore floods back in 2021 with the effects into 2022. There were a series of warning gauges that were not appropriate. That meant as the rivers rose, the information was not coming as fast as it should. And because all of it happened in the middle of the night, most people, of course, were asleep, meaning people had to be fetched from roofs. We all remember the time way back then. And then there's the more controversial stuff. Stuff like the adjusting of temperatures. There's been much written about this, much discussed. Malcolm Roberts has been asking questions about it, but of course the media will not cover it inside the Senate, which has been the claims about how hot recent summers have been, that this one is the highest on record. The only problem is that there were other hotter summers, but the numbers had been shaved. Now, again, I'm not suggesting anything illegal or nefarious, but something worth talking about. In the same way that we have to have absolute oversight of the Australian Electoral Commission in real time, people behind the scenes responsible for the system giving interviews about the failures of the system, this has to happen with the Bureau of Meteorology. It's good that they gave a sorry after the website design, but clearly there is a pattern of behaviour that exists inside the management that is either unwilling to discuss or is too late to tell of the failures that take place. As David Littleproud said, often what ends up happening is they just say, we need more money. Well, okay, but you need to admit the mistakes as you make them. Because as we know, weather leads to climate, climate leads to politics, but more importantly, information minute by minute matters so people can save their lives and save their properties. If you've got a view or more about that, please send me an email. I'd love to know more personal stories about when the bomb got it wrong. We give them the benefit of the doubt, but that doesn't mean a free pass. Send me an email, paul@skynews.com.au. As we know, there is a debate happening about exactly how Australia is going to put a system in place where people under the age of 16 will not be able to have accounts on all of the major social media platforms, including YouTube. Discussions have been happening for some time, and there are senators that sit on committees responsible for trying to make sure that this thing happens as smoothly as possible. One of them is our mate Ross Goodell, who appears quite frequently on this program, the Nationals senator. Well, he accused TikTok of bullying his staff. This was a back and forth that took place in a Senate hearing a little bit earlier this week.
How is it that when I was in this hearing last time, a member of your staff phoned through the switch here, and by intimidation of, oh, we get on very well with the leader's office, we get on very well with the shadow minister's office, you shouldn't be asking these questions, you shouldn't be saying this. If a staff member of yours in a government representation area is willing to phone through the switch to a senator's office while in a hearing and intimidate and bully, how can I believe your company doesn't have a culture that tolerates that?
Well played, sir. The denial, of course, did not happen inside the parliament, but on the TV.
I'm not aware of the details that you're talking about, and what I can say is that the team needs to operate professionally and appropriately at all times, and I have confidence that that's what we do.
My apologies, happened inside the Senate hearing. I thought it happened on a breakfast TV show. My apologies. Now, while you have been working hard, and this being the hump day, the midway point, you now start to make money for yourself, not paying tax. But what do they do with the money that we have to pay the staffers to help them make bad social media videos? This is showbiz for ugly people, and a Labor senator is shady.
Guess who's back? Back again. The Coalition's back. Tell a friend. Yep, here they go again.
Eminem, so now. Meantime, a federal cabinet minister would like to show us their hobby.
Reasons why I don't crochet.
Aren't you glad you work so hard to pay for these people and the staff to make them local celebrities? And if that's not high class enough for you, what about a couple of ministers snapping away at some clinkers?
If this clinker is pink, we're going to invest in more contraceptives to make them more affordable for more women.
If this clinker is yellow, we will make IUDs cheaper from November 1. Woo!
Do better!